Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Ali Burstyn, and I'm an organisational psychologist. I hail from Australia, and I'm based here in, here in Calgary, but actually I'm based in Vancouver these days. It's with pleasure that I get to speak to you this morning about managing leadership complexities for thriving workplaces. Before I start, two things. I want to just clarify that no algorithms have been used in the presentation. And also, too, that all the information that has been put together today as part of this presentation has been verified by the institutions. I'll let your next speaker talk a little bit more about the institutions and algorithms, but for my purpose today, as I said, I'm going to be talking about thriving workplaces and how we create that. And importantly, too, how have we managed to do that? I'm going to give you a real-life case study. I'm going to show you exactly how we've looked at creating experiential learning and used a very human-centric approach to create the behavioural change needed for the energy transition. Because really, at the heart of it, people are the focus of our energy transition. Some people ask me, what is an organisational psychologist? And at the end of the day, my role is to improve productivity and performance in people. So that means, at the end of the day, we look at creating resilient, adaptable, and inclusive workplaces. So as we shift to understanding what resilient, adaptable, and inclusive workplaces look like, we really need to try to firstly understand what some of these leadership complexities are that exist in our workplaces. And look, they're complex. There's no sugarcoating on any of this. I've got quite a few listed up here at the moment. You know, we've got increased cognitive load, and I'm sure you've heard about all of these things, particularly yesterday. Increased information networks. We've got big pace of change we're trying to work through. We've got a skills gap through change in workforce capabilities. Our next intergenerational leaders are looking for more purpose. They're looking for meaningful work. They're looking how to create impact. And they're really shaking up how we actually employ people into these roles. The leadership complexities continue to increase. And really, we're not thriving. Right? So 62% of employees are not engaged, right? 58% report struggling in life, and 20% say that they're lonely. In addition to that, daily negative emotions were sitting at 41%. 21% was anger. Life evaluation was looking at 8% of people are currently suffering, and 15% are actively disengaged in their roles. Lastly, we know, according to the recent research that we've looked at, 52% of people at the moment have intent to leave, right? Our workplaces are not thriving. Which then leads us to this mental health crisis that we're working with and trying to understand more about at the moment. 500,000 lost days each week in Canada due to ill mental health. We have 1 in 5 Canadians experience poor mental illness. 60% of employees see work as the #1 factor in their mental health. And look, we're looking at really a US $2.5 trillion cost of mental health across the globe at the moment. So what I'd like to do now is, obviously I've set the scene to let you know that we've got some issues here when it comes to creating thriving workplaces. We need to tackle big questions and big problems. We need to problem solve for the energy transition. How do we engage our people to do that in a human-centric way? Well, this is where my organisation excels. We really understand what the human-centric approach looks like, and that is really understanding the evidence-based nature of the work that we do that ensures that we are creating workplaces that are actually based on people's feedback, their needs, and their requirements. At Metasphere, we do things differently. We wake up every day trying to understand how we can create thriving workplaces. We wake up every day going, okay, I've got a fantastic new idea. This is what the research says. How do we actually deploy this in these workplaces that we have the pleasure of working in? And I think fundamentally, we have teams of organisational psychologists who study human behaviour at work to ensure that we are improving productivity and performance every day and that we are thriving. So let me actually give you an example, a real-life example of what we did a couple of years ago by using a human-centric approach. We created a program called Thriving Leaders. And what our hypothesis was is how might we actually be able to upskill our leaders to effectively manage mental health, well-being and psychological safety in a safe and inclusive way? How can you do that? So the client came to us and said, like most clients do, we have training overload. Everyone does lots of training and we don't just want more training to put on top of that. They had a lot of traditional methods that they were using, so that is a mostly one-size-fits-all approach. And what they were doing is they were seeing that this one-size-fits-all approach just simply wasn't working. And they really had an open mind to doing something different. And that's where we come in as a disruptor. And we go, hey, let's do something a little bit different. This was a $200 billion company with 90,000 plus employees based all over the world. They had never done anything like this before. And for us to come in and create a brand new piece of work that was looking at a human-centric focus was an absolute privilege for us, because we were really excited about how they were hoping and looking forward to improving their mental health and well-being, their psychological safety, and being able to do that in a very inclusive way. So this particular program around Thriving Leaders, as I said, had a very human-centric approach. So what we did is we used an evidence-based behavioural change approach. Now, this is just a little bit different. What we did is we looked at what are the actual behaviours that are involved to create the impact that you need. So for example, do I need to practice more empathy? Do I need to be more consistent? Do I need to be more open and curious? There were very specific behaviours that were associated with creating the workplace that we needed to create. And in doing so, we had a spoonful of strategy. So what that meant is we went through and we understood very, very deeply about what their strategic objectives were in this particular organisation over the next 5 years. And we asked them, what sort of leaders do you need in 5 years, right? What do you need? And they said, listen, we need adaptable leaders. We need leaders who can push and move with change. We need leaders who can bring everybody else on the journey in a rapidly changing world. And I'm like, well, you got to swap things up. You got to change your approach, because what you're doing right now is simply not working. What we did is we looked at mitigating illness, we looked at preventing harm and promoting thriving for 165 leaders. Now, in doing so, one of the key elements to this was ensuring that we had leader buy-in, right? In any cultural change that you create, you must have senior leadership buy-in to ensure that they're role modelling the positive behaviours moving forward in terms of, hey, look, I've got this particular thing on today, why don't you come along and listen and have a bit of a conversation with these people, right? This is the way forward. I'm here to support you. Now, this was the actual problem, this was our hypothesis, and this is how we used a human-centric approach to come up with some pretty fascinating results. First things first, we had leader authenticity increased, right? We had people feeling safer having difficult conversations. Leaders felt better equipped to adapt to the very rapidly changing workforce. Change resiliency increased, and that feeling of inclusivity increased, right? Which also comes back to what we call sense of belonging. So that is, this particular organisation were absolutely on the front foot with creating a diverse and inclusive workplace. They had very strict targets in place about how they were going to create this workplace that brought all different types of people together. What they failed to do, right, is actually equip those leaders with the skills to lead in diverse and inclusive ways, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to bring all these new people into the organisation with lots of different skills that we haven't used before, but what we haven't done is we haven't equipped our leaders to have those inclusive conversations, right? This sense of belonging was absolutely critical so that everyone felt like they belonged to the organisation, which also helps us with loyalty, morale and engagement to help us create that thriving workplace. So as we worked through in an experiential way, using a human-centric approach, what we did is we started to find that behaviours started to shift and leaders started to hold each other accountable. So they would say out in the field, hey, actually, you can't say that because that might offend that other person. Or I know you might not have said this, but that could be considered disrespectful to this person, right? They started to hold each other accountable in very unique ways on their behaviours that they were displaying every day in a really inclusive and respectful way. And so by the time we'd finished this piece of work, we had leaders displaying the desired behaviours 90% of the time. Now, this data was collected from their manager, from their peers, and also self-rated, and that was our average, about 90%, which is quite fascinating, to be honest. By using this behavioural approach, we were also able to utilise a methodology that enabled us to also move and shift the framework as we needed to, as the organisation changed. For example, they updated their values, they worked through different challenges over this period of time, and we were able to adjust as we needed to suit the capability and the needs and the requirements of the people who are at the very heart of this organisation's transition. So, most organisations, well, 81% of them, will start to focus on training and development as their main strategy for mitigating leadership complexities, right? That's normally what they'll do. What they do is they generally focus on three things. They'll focus on also recruitment in terms of traditional methods. And they'll say, okay, well, actually, in actual fact, I think we're probably surpassing, we've made some good inroads on the recruitment piece. We're a little bit more open to how we do that, a little bit more sophisticated, and that is that we're employing and recruiting different types of people with different skills. The second thing that they'll do here is they'll focus on promotion, right, which is a traditional approach, and that is traditionally leaders are promoted through technical excellence and not having the skills and the tools to manage people, right? This is a traditional approach. And the third thing when it comes to training and development, they have this sense traditionally that, okay, we're just going to put everybody into these training programs for 3 days, we're going to throw out some really great ideas and we're going to clap our hands and everyone's just going to know how to lead. And then you go do your job, right? Because we've ticked the training. And then comes workload pressure and stress and mental health concern, and it's just they default back to where they were, right? So by using a human-centric approach, this is us saying traditional development needs to change in the pace of change. We need to move forward. We know that human centricity increases engagement. We know it increases productivity, and we know that it increases employee well-being, so we can thrive. My last slide with you this morning is really articulating 3 different levels on how you can make a difference in your organisation, right? And as organisational psychologists, we look at this at individual, team, and organisational levels. First up, at an individual level, what can you do yourself? First thing, we can look at building resiliency, okay? So that is understanding how we bounce back from adversity. How are you doing that? We can challenge our own biases. We can focus on our well-being. We can understand digital fluency. So how do the data and analysis actually help us function better? As an example, I wear this pretty cool Aura ring, and all the data that comes out of this ring every day shows me how I'm actually working through my day and performing, and I look at this analysis and I'm like, I need to improve here, here, and here because I work best here, here, and here. So what we're doing, or what I'm doing, is using the data to improve my own experience and my own well-being. So at individual levels, also connection and trust. And I know your upcoming speaker is going to be talking to you a lot about connection and trust as well. At team levels, what we encourage is for you to emphasise purpose. okay? Emphasize the purpose of what you're doing, the goals you're creating. We're in this together, right? And also at team levels, we talk about sense of belonging and creating psychological safety, which ultimately means a shared belief that it is safe for interpersonal risk. Also on a team level, we also talk about creating a learning culture, so saying it's okay for us to make mistakes and move forward. And lastly, connection. Again, that's going to be the common denominator across all three. From an organisational perspective, we talk about creating adaptive leadership. We talk about revisiting job design, so actually creating jobs that fit that individual and the future of the organisation. And lastly, we urge organisations to revisit strategy and understand where we can create thriving workplaces within a strategic objective. We talk about adaptive leadership for our organisations as well, and also keeping an open mind that traditional development is not keeping up with the pace of change. My name's Ali Burston. Thank you so much for having me today. I'd now like to welcome Holly Ransom onto the stage, if I could, please.
Oh, I was going to come back and give you a round of applause. Ali Burston, everyone. You're doing my job for me.
Well, you know, I try to help. But look, what I wanted to do, Holly, is on behalf of all of us here today, I just want to say thank you for doing such a fantastic job as our host and moderator and just the MC with the mostest. So on behalf of everybody, thank you so much, Holly.
Thank you, that's very kind. Thank you very much. Well, if I can be so cheeky as to then throw a question at you, given you've done that to me unannounced, I'm going to throw a question to you unannounced. There were a lot of really big and important ideas in that presentation around levers for human centricity, purpose, belonging, like safety, resiliency. I'm interested in where you feel, in your data-informed view with the work that you do, we've got the biggest gap between knowing and doing. Kind of where do we talk a good game, but we really fall short? Like if you were to really say, observationally, I would feel like this is the area where we've really got to do some work to close that gap. Given we're talking so much about implementation today, where do we talk the talk but not walk the walk?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Holly. I think fundamentally it's leadership capability, right? We need to equip our leaders with the skills and the tools and the capability to lead the way that we need them to for the future. And that might look different for different organisations. But if we're not focusing on how leaders actually lead, they're just simply using the tools on their tool belt that they've always used, right? And you put them in an environment where people aren't thriving and they've got added workload pressure, they understand the rapid change, they're going to default to what they've always done. And that's not going to keep up with the change. So absolutely leadership capability to help drive this notion that people are the very asset of our energy transition.
It's funny you say that. You made me laugh when you were talking about sort of getting everyone together for 3 days or 1 day and then assuming the job's done. And I had an incident with a client the other week where it was exactly that case. And I sort of made the parallel between that's like getting a sporting team to show up and train for 1 day and then thinking they can play a competitive season. That idea of we have to train what we then hope to demonstrate and practice.
Exactly. And it's a very traditional way of looking at training and development. But my question is, how do we then just clap our hands and go, well, just go out there and lead? It doesn't work. It's got to be experiential. It's got to have messages there that connect with people and go, actually, that's a really good idea. I think I can do that. Yes, I know how to do that, and knowledge transfer commences.
Well, thank you for giving us so many great ideas this morning on how we can do exactly that. Dr. Ali Burston, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.